Welcome back to Chapter 24, Part 3, as we conclude our kind of examination at World War I. In our last episode, we took a look at America being drawn into the war and what we did to help end the Great War. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at what was done inside the United States to help the soldiers win it. During the war, America really kind of saw the power of government kind of being strengthened as it got involved in daily lives and activities. And it created many different committees and agencies to try to help the war effort run smoothly, as we really were kind of at total war, garnering support from all of our citizens to help in the war effort. One of the committees created was the Committee on Public Safety, headed by George Creel. And his task was to try to create this anti-German campaign, to create posters and little movie clips to try to express this anti-German attitude, to try to convince Americans to do all they could to help fight, whether it was volunteer to protect one's loved ones, or to simply work hard and produce the goods that might be needed. Now, some activities that the government did were kind of a little bit more repressive than others. If we take a look at the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which were passed in 1917 and 1918, what you see is really anything that was, kind of hurting the war effort was made illegal. People couldn't speak out against the draft. They couldn't even criticize the color of the uniforms or the American flag. They couldn't hinder the war efforts at home or abroad without being brought up on charges under the Espionage and Sedition Acts. So really kind of did away with free speech and free press and people's ability to kind of say and believe and act the way that they wanted. Something that probably wouldn't go for today because of how much we believe in our rights and would speak out against these types of issues today. Now, an example of the government getting involved in the production of goods is the War Industries Board, headed by Bernard Baruch. And what he oversaw was basically the production of the American factories. He kind of determined what factories got what natural resources, what would be produced, how much would be produced, and made sure that the trains and everything was, getting things to where they needed to go. So we kind of see this growth of government getting involved in kind of private enterprise to try to help produce all the war goods that the soldiers would need in World War I. But it wasn't just in dealing with production of goods that the government was involved in. They also tried to get people, albeit voluntarily, to sacrifice when it came to foods as well. And this time it was Herbert Hoover who headed up the Food Administration. Now, Hoover will one day be president himself, but here his whole campaign was try to get people to voluntarily give up meat one night a week or one day a week, to give up wheat products another night of the week, and even to try to grow their own victory gardens to produce their own foods that they could consume, to try to preserve more of that was being produced to feed the soldiers abroad. So these were everyday actions that every citizen could partake in. We also had like recycling days where people could recycle scrap metal and rubber and different goods to try to be reused into military service in one way or another. But that's not the only way people were sacrificing by reducing and recycling. But as the men were off fighting, we also see women enter the workforce in huge numbers. And they're the kind of the backbone of production as they were producing the guns and bullets and transportation and planes that our army would need to win the war. But again, it wasn't just the women who helped produce these war goods. We also see nearly 500,000 African Americans move northwards to take jobs in factories in the production of what was needed to help win the war. And another 200,000 served in the military. And in the military, they faced segregation and discrimination. But by serving their country during the time of war, we kind of have the idea of the double V, victory abroad and victory at home, because not only were they fighting abroad, but when they came home, it kind of encouraged them to take up kind of the civil rights movement here at home to try to win more rights here as well. And therefore, obviously, with the efforts of our soldiers and our citizens at home, we were able to help win World War I. Now, at its conclusion, when the Big Four met at Versailles, they hammered out what became known as the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Big Four were Woodrow Wilson from the United States, David Lloyd George from Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando from Italy, and George Clemenceau from France. Now, whereas Wilson took a more moderate approach and one of reconciliation, the other three kind of wanted to punish Germany and kind of teach them a lesson for having started this war. And so the Treaty of Versailles really does place the blame on the Germans. It forces them to pay large reparations, which is kind of like money for war damages. It strips them of their right to have an air force. They have to limit their size of their navy and armies, and really kind of it punishes them so much that it kind of lays the groundwork for future bitter feelings of the Germans, and this feeling of kind of wanting to get their power back, which enables Hitler eventually to rise to power and strengthen Germany once again. So you see, Wilson had kind of devised this plan known as his 14 points, which were meant to kind of like be 14 things that would try to keep peace, for the future generations. And his 14th point was for the creation of a League of Nations, this international governing body which would try to keep the peace. Now, other countries join it. We never do because it causes issues at home that Congress couldn't grapple with. It's something that we'll kind of talk about in class a little bit more. But suffice it to say, without us a part of this league, eventually it's not as strong as it could be. And obviously after World War II, we do help create and join the United Nations, which is kind of modeled after the League of Nations. And when it was all said and done, if you take a look at the map on the left, before World War I, you can kind of see Germany and Austria-Hungary and how they kind of dominated the central part of Europe. And on the right side there, after World War I, you can see all the new countries that were created. Some from German lands, some from Austria-Hungary, and even some taken from the Russians as well, as they had kind of dropped out of the war before it was over, after their own little revolution. So we do have this redrawing of boundaries of Europe. You also see that Germany loses their colonial empire, and Britain and France kind of divide up the spoils of war. So that concludes our look at World War I, and in our next episode, we'll begin our look at the Roaring Twenties.